there! I'm Sarah A. Chrisman, the author of The Tales of Chetzemoka, and today I'm going to make Nurse McCoy's Cornmeal Mush. The recipe for this is at the back of Love Will Find a Wheel. The recipe for cornmeal mush that appears at the end of Book 2 of The Tales of Chetzemoka, Love Will Find a Wheel, originally came from a 19th century cookbook and reads as follows. How to make mush. Very few people know how to make this dish as it should be. The ingredients for a dish of mush are water, salt, and cornmeal. The water should be soft, the salt fine, and the cornmeal of the first quality. Yellow meal gives the best color, but white meal is the more easily cooked. The water should be boiling hot at the commencement, middle, and end of the operation. The meal should be added very slowly so as to prevent any lumps from being formed, the cook stirring all the time, and should never be in such quantities as would bring down the temperature of the water below the boiling point. Herein lies the secret of making good mush. Mush should be thoroughly cooked. Exactly how long it takes to cook will depend on how finely or coarsely ground your cornmeal is. The basic yellow cornmeal that's sold for baking in America won't take long at all. It's ground fine enough that it will absorb the boiling water almost as soon as you sprinkle it in, so it'll be done pretty quickly. On the other end of the spectrum, the coarsest cornmeal that I've personally worked with is the type marketed as polenta. It's quite good, but be aware that because it's ground more coarsely than the cornmeal sold for baking, it'll absorb the water more slowly and take longer to cook. Whatever type of cornmeal you're using, it should feel quite soft when it's thoroughly cooked. If it feels gritty or hard against your teeth, add a little more boiling water and cook it a little bit longer. Cornmeal mush is a great hot cereal, and it's nice and cheap. Traditionally, it's sweetened with molasses, but you can also use honey, maple syrup, brown sugar, or white sugar. Personally, I like mine unsweetened with just a pinch of salt. If you make too much mush, you can pour out the extra to cool and then fry it up later. This is actually how cornmeal mush comes up in the story in Love Will Find a Wheel. Jacob finds Nurse McCoy cooking up fried mush and dandelion greens for breakfast. When she finds out what he's been eating lately, she throws a few more eggs on the stove, divides up her breakfast with him, and basically orders him to sit down to a decent meal before he spoils his strong constitution. To fry up cornmeal mush, let it cool thoroughly before cutting it in pieces and frying it to a golden brown on both sides. I was a vegetarian for 29 years, so I've made these with a lot of different types of grease. Everything from olive oil to butter to almond oil, I think I tried one time. Crisco was vile. After I started eating meat again after 29 years as a vegetarian, the one that I find works best is bacon grease. It works better than any other sort of oil. In terms of why I stopped being a vegetarian, I woke up one morning and couldn't feel my left leg. And any of you who've read Victorian Secrets or This Victorian Life, you know about my friend Tom. Sweet guy. He's a research scientist. He's a former EMT. He does search and rescue in his spare time. So when I woke up and couldn't feel my left leg or move my left leg, I asked him for help, and he asked me a bunch of questions, and he was the one who worked out it was vitamin B12 deficiency. There just are no vegetable sources of B12. It's only in the animal kingdom. There are a few analogs that look similar to B12 in the vegetable kingdom, but they don't do the same things for the human system. And so I had a choice to make, and I did some heart searching, and I decided that if I truly valued all life, then that had to include my life too. That had to be valuable too, and I wanted to keep walking. So I started eating meat again, and a bunch of other health problems I dealt with for years and years went away too. So those turned out to have been because of the vitamin deficiency. Another interesting side note to all this, read into it whatever you will, when I was having my first meat meal again after 29 years as a vegetarian, I was curious about, I started thinking about historical traditions of feast days and fast days, just because I always think of things in terms of history. And I just got really curious as to when the feast day of Saint Sarah was. And so as my first meat meal in 29 years was cooking, I looked up when the feast day of Saint Sarah was, and it happened to be that day. So read into that whatever you will. The healthful properties of dandelions have been appreciated since at least the 10th century, and dandelion greens go really well with fried cornmeal mush. Dandelion greens have more than twice as much vitamin K as collard greens do, and they've got more calcium and iron than kale does. Young dandelion leaves are less bitter than they'll be after the plant blooms, and you can use them in salads. After dandelions have bloomed, you can cut down the bitterness somewhat by cooking them and adding salt. Some people might still find them to be an acquired taste, since they'll still be more bitter than most foods modern Americans are accustomed to. Traditionally, bitter greens like dandelions were thought to purify the blood, and some Asian cultures still consider bitter foods to be a very important part of a well-rounded diet. Wash and chop your dandelion greens, then set them aside until your mush is nearly ready. You really just want the heat to wilt the greens enough to make them tender. You don't want to burn them to a crisp. So here I've got my fried mush and my dandelion greens. I'm sure Nurse McCoy would approve. Thank you for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a nice thumbs up. And remember to tell your friends about my books. Happy reading!